Have you ever noticed the more you try to stay in touch with someone, the colder they become toward you? The more you text, the shorter their replies get. The more you explain, the more impatient they become. The more you try to prove your value, the less they value you. You think the problem is that you're not good enough. You think you need to be clearer, show more, be more present. Wrong. The problem is not that you lack value. The problem is you're giving away too much of your presence. You're always there, always responding, always available. And in the human world, what is always available will never be appreciated. They don't hate you. They just aren't afraid of losing you. And when someone isn't afraid of losing you, you've lost all your power. That's why you're taken for granted. That's why you're replaced. That's why you're always the one trying harder in every relationship. Not because you're weak, but because you're too easy to have. The truth no one wants to tell you is, in the power game between people, silence and absence are more valuable than thousands of words. But you were taught the opposite, that you must communicate, must explain, must always be present. And that is what's killing you. You didn't lose them because you were silent. You lost them because you never knew how to be silent. Today I won't give you comfortable advice. I'll give you the truth, the kind that may make you uncomfortable, but if you understand it, you will never be underestimated again. You were taught that if there's a problem, speak up. If there's a misunderstanding, explain. If someone changes their attitude, ask for clarity. You believe communication is the key to every relationship. But there is a truth you've experienced many times. You just haven't dared to name it. The more you talk, the more you are taken lightly. The more you explain, the more you lose value. The more you try to maintain the connection, the more the other person pulls away. You think it's a coincidence, but it's not. It's a rule. People don't operate based on logic the way you think. They operate based on perceived value. And in behavioral psychology, value doesn't come from how much you give. Value comes from how easy or hard it is for others to lose you. What is always available becomes invisible. You reply to messages immediately. You're always available when they need you. You always explain when there's a misunderstanding. You think that's maturity, but in other people's eyes, it's a signal that you have nothing more important than them. And when someone feels they can always access you, they start lowering their level of appreciation. This is the principle of scarcity. It doesn't only apply to money or material things, but directly to people as well. The rarer something is, the harder it is to access, the more limited it is, the more valuable it becomes. On the other hand, what is always available will be consumed without thought. You are turning yourself into a free resource. You give time, you give attention, you give emotions, without limits, without conditions, and then you wonder why others don't value you. The truth is, they don't need to. You have never put them in a position where they could lose you. A relationship without the risk of loss will never have high value. That's why people who are always busy, always have boundaries, always hard to access, are often more respected. Not because they are better than you, but because they don't distribute themselves for free. You are different. You think if you give enough, people will recognize your value. But human psychology doesn't work that way. When you give too much, people don't see you as more valuable. They just get used to receiving. And when they get used to receiving, they start demanding. That's how you get pulled down. Another mechanism is quietly at work, and you don't realize it. You always try to complete everything. Every conversation, every misunderstanding, every emotion. You want everything to be clear, transparent, neatly finished. But that's exactly what makes you easy to forget. The human brain tends to remember unfinished things more strongly than completed ones. When you explain everything, when you say all your thoughts, when you close every loop, you become a finished story. People understand you, categorize you, and put you aside. But when you stay silent, when you don't say everything, When you withdraw at the right time, you become an unanswered question. And an unanswered question will stay in their mind longer than you think. They will wonder what you're thinking. They will analyze your actions. They will fill in the gaps you created. You don't need to try to impress. Just stop over-explaining. There is another mistake you are making. You think that if you don't respond immediately, if you don't keep in touch, if you're not proactive, you will lose them. And that fear makes you act like someone who lacks. You constantly check your phone. You wait for responses. You get anxious when others are silent. But you don't realize that that very state is placing you in a lower position. In any interaction, the one who needs more is always in the weaker position. The more you need their attention, the less they need your presence. This is the power dynamic no one tells you directly. You don't lose value because you're not good enough. You lose value because you depend on other people's reactions. When your emotions rise and fall based on how they treat you, you've given them control. And when you give away control, you have no power. That's why those who are silent, those who don't respond immediately, those who don't rush to explain, create a sense of unpredictability. Not because they are trying to be mysterious, but because they are not driven by the need to be understood. They don't need you to understand them immediately. They don't need to win every conversation. They don't need to always be present. And that is what makes them different. But there is one thing you need to understand clearly. Absence is not disappearing out of weakness. Silence is not avoidance. If you have no value, if you have no inner strength, if you have no life of your own, then withdrawing will only make you forgotten faster. Absence only has power when your presence once had value. If there is nothing to remember, no one will remember you. So the problem is not just how often you show up, it's what you bring when you do. You don't need to talk a lot to be respected. You need to make your presence carry weight. And sometimes the fastest way to increase that weight is to reduce how often you show up. But that's still not the most dangerous mistake. The next mistakes are what are silently destroying your entire value without you even realizing it. Mistake 1. The trap of kindness. You were taught that kindness is a good trait, that if you treat others well, you will receive respect in return, that if you are always willing to help, others will appreciate you. But the reality you've experienced is not like that. The more lenient you are, the more people cross your boundaries. The more you tolerate, the more they take it for granted. The more you give, the less they acknowledge it. The problem is not that kindness is wrong. The problem is how you use it. When kindness is not paired with boundaries, it is no longer a value. It becomes a signal that you are willing to be used. People are very good at reading signals, not through what you say, but through how you behave. When you always say, "It's okay, I understand, let me handle it," you are teaching others that they don't need to be careful with you. You think you are building a relationship, but in reality, you are digging a hole that you will fall into yourself. A person who is always willing to give without asking for anything will sooner or later be seen as the default. And when you become the default, you lose value. No one appreciates what they don't have to work for. The cruel part is this: others are not doing it intentionally. They are just reacting instinctively. They prioritize what is rare, what is difficult, what can be lost. You are not in that group. You are always there. You don't force them to choose you. You just are always available.
And when there is no need to choose, they will never see you as special. Your kindness is not wrong, but the way you distribute it is destroying you. You don't need to become cold. You need to become selective. Not everyone deserves the best version of you. But if you keep giving without distinction, you will continue to be taken lightly. And that's still not what completely takes away your power. Mistake 2. The one who is always there is the easiest to replace. Look at how you show up in other people's lives. You reply to messages quickly. You are always ready when they need you. You are always there when they call. You think that's reliability. But in other people's eyes, it's excess. When something is always accessible at any time, it no longer feels special. It becomes background. Something that always exists but doesn't require attention. Like air. You only realize the value of air when it's gone. People are the same. When you are always present, you don't create space for others to feel your absence. No space, no emotion. No emotion, no value. You are not replaced because you are worse. You are replaced because your presence creates no sense of loss. Someone else can appear. They don't need to be better than you, just newer. And that's enough, because you left no space for them to miss you. The same applies at work. The person who always takes on more tasks, always says yes, always agrees to every request, is not the one most highly valued. They are the most convenient. And the convenient one is often the most exploited.
The person with value is not the one who does the most, but the one who knows when to show up and when not to. They don't refuse everything, but they don't say yes to everything. They create boundaries, and those boundaries create respect. If you are always there, you give others no chance to miss you. And when no one needs to miss you, you become easy to replace. But there is something even more dangerous than always being present. Mistake 3. Addiction to attention. You think you are trying to maintain a relationship, but in reality, you are addicted to the feeling of being responded to. You open your phone not because you have something important to do. You open it because you are waiting for a message. You don't talk because the content is valuable. You talk to maintain connection. You are not silent because you have nothing to say. You speak because you are afraid of silence. And that fear is controlling you. The feeling when they reply, the feeling when they care, the feeling when you are not ignored. It creates a cycle. You send, you wait, you receive a response, you feel relief, then repeat. That is not connection. That is dependency. You are no longer in control of your behavior. You react to stimuli. And when you depend on other people's responses, you give them control. They don't have to do much. Just stay silent for a bit, and you start to worry. They don't need to try. You will be the one maintaining the rhythm. You become the follower, not because they are stronger, but because you need them more. A person who is not addicted to attention does not get pulled into this game. They may not reply immediately. They may not react right away. They don't feel pressure to maintain constant interaction, and that makes them unpredictable. Unpredictability creates attention. Attention creates power. The more predictable you are, the easier you are to control. And the more you depend on others' emotions, the further you drift from your true value.
But the most brutal part is not here. Mistake 4. When silence becomes a weapon. You have been in a conversation where the other person doesn't respond immediately. They look at you, they listen to you, but they don't rush to reply. The silence stretches, and you start to feel uncomfortable. You wonder, did I say something wrong? You begin to explain more. You speak more than necessary, and you don't realize you just gave away more information. Silence creates pressure, not because it is obviously powerful, but because it forces others to fill the gap. When there is no response, the brain works harder. It tries to explain, to guess, to find meaning. And in that process, people reveal more themselves. You don't need to force them to speak. You just need to not rush to break the silence. In negotiation, the one who talks more is often the one who loses the advantage. In conflict, the one who reacts faster is often the one pulled into a weaker position. You don't need to win with words. You can control by not speaking. But this only works if you can control yourself. If you are silent because you are afraid others will sense it, if you are silent because you don't know what to say, it creates no power. Silence only becomes a weapon when it is a choice, when you are fully capable of speaking but choose not to, when you don't need to win the argument, when you don't need to be understood immediately. At that point, you are no longer pulled into the game. You stand outside of it, and the one who stands outside always sees more clearly. But if you use silence the wrong way, it will backfire. Mistake 5. Absence does not save a person who has no value. Many people hear about the power of absence and think that simply withdrawing is enough. They stop texting, they stay silent, they disappear, and they wait for others to come back. But nothing happens. No one looks for them. No one asks about them. No one cares. And they conclude that it doesn't work. But the problem is not the strategy. The problem is the foundation. Absence only has value when your presence once meant something. If you didn't leave an impression, then your disappearance only makes things quieter, not lacking you, but nothing changes. You cannot create a void if you didn't occupy a large enough space before. That's why one person can leave and change the entire room, while another leaves and no one notices. Not because they are bad, but because they created no impact. Absence is not a strategy to make others miss you if there is nothing to remember. It is a tool to amplify value that already exists. So before thinking about withdrawing, you must build inner strength. You must have your own life. You must have goals. You must have something that makes you not need to cling to others. When you don't need, you can withdraw without fear. And when you are not afraid, your behavior begins to change. But this is where many people fail.
Mistake 6. The one who can walk away is always the one with power. You have been in a situation where you clearly knew you were not respected, but you stayed. You explained. You tried to fix things. You hoped everything would get better. But deep inside, you knew you were in a weak position. Why didn't you leave? Because you were afraid. Afraid of losing them. Afraid of starting over. Afraid of the emptiness. And that fear keeps you in situations that diminish your value. The person with power is not the one who controls others, but the one who is not dependent on whether others stay or leave. When you are willing to walk away, you no longer have to accept what does not fit. You don't need to argue to prove you are right. You don't need to stay to fix what you didn't cause. You just leave. Quietly, without explanation, without needing permission. And that action creates a gap that others cannot immediately fill. They start thinking. They start reflecting. But by then, you are no longer there. You don't leave to make them regret. You leave because you do not accept being taken lightly. That is the difference. A person who leaves out of hurt is still attached. A person who leaves because they understand their value is free. And when you reach that point, you no longer need to prove anything. But understanding this is not enough. You need to know how to apply it in the real world. Understanding the problem does not change you. You can agree with everything above and still repeat the same behavior tomorrow. Because what is controlling you is not logic. It is habit. It is reflex. It is the fear of abandonment rooted deep for a long time. If you do not change how you act every day, all of this awareness is just a moment of emotion that fades away. So you need a different approach. Not inspiration, not motivation, but discipline. Not to become cold to the world, but to control yourself. Start with the simplest thing, your words. For the next 7 days, cut in half the number of times you say unnecessary things. Not complete silence, but pause before speaking and ask yourself, is this really necessary? Most of what you say is not to convey value, but to fill silence. You explain because you are afraid of being misunderstood. You talk more because you are afraid of being ignored. You react quickly because you are afraid of losing connection. But every time you act from that fear, you reinforce it. Learn to tolerate silence, not avoidance, but not rushing to break it. When someone does not reply immediately, do not instantly try to pull them back. When a conversation pauses, do not try to stretch it with unnecessary words. Not every silence needs to be filled. You need to build the ability to be alone without feeling lacking. If you cannot do that, you will always seek validation from outside. And when you need validation, you are easy to control. Next is controlling your reactions. Not every action needs a response. Not every statement needs a reply. When someone says something that bothers you, your reflex is to respond. But that reflex does not make you stronger. It only makes you more predictable. Others can control you just by triggering the right weakness. If they know you will react when your ego is touched, they only need to do that, and you will put yourself at a disadvantage. Learn to delay your reaction, not to appear indifferent, but to ensure your actions are not controlled by temporary emotions. A few seconds of silence before responding can change the entire outcome of a conversation. You begin to observe more, listen more, notice things you used to miss because you were too busy talking. Your presence begins to gain depth. A person who does not talk much but speaks at the right moment carries more weight than someone who talks constantly. Next is managing your availability. You do not need to always respond immediately. You do not need to always be there when others need you.
That does not make you irresponsible. It helps you reset the value of your time and attention. When you respond instantly all the time, you are teaching others that they have unlimited access to you. And when access is unlimited, value becomes zero. Create intentional distance, not to manipulate, but to protect your energy. There are messages that do not need immediate replies. There are calls you do not need to answer. There are invitations you do not need to accept. You do not need to explain every decision you make. The more you explain, the more you place yourself in a position of needing approval. But when you do not need approval, you begin to be free. Freedom does not come from people understanding you. Freedom comes from not needing them to understand. Another important principle: build inner strength instead of seeking attention. If your life revolves around responses from others, you will always be pulled away from your own center.
You need something bigger than short-term interactions. Work, skills, health, personal discipline. When you have a clear direction, you no longer have time to cling to every message, every reaction. Your focus shifts to building, not waiting. And when you stop waiting, your behavior changes. You no longer react instantly. You no longer need to check constantly. You no longer feel anxious without responses. You begin to become the one who controls the pace, not by forcing others, but by not letting them control you. One more thing you must accept: not everyone will understand your change. When you start setting boundaries, some people will feel uncomfortable. They will say you have changed. They will say you have become cold. They will try to pull you back to your old version. Not because they hate you, but because they are used to you being easy to access. When you change, you disrupt that comfort, and their reaction is understandable. But you cannot build new value if you keep old behaviors just to keep others comfortable. You do not need to please everyone. You need to be honest with yourself. Finally, learn to leave at the right time. Not when things are already unbearable, but when you realize you are being taken lightly. You do not need to argue to prove your value. You do not need to stay to fix what you do not control. You just need enough clarity to know when to stop. Leaving is not failure. Leaving is a decision. A decision that you do not accept staying where you must trade your value just to exist. When you can leave without needing to explain, you have changed your position in every relationship. You are no longer the one who needs to be chosen. You are the one who can choose. And that is where power begins. But all of this only matters if you actually apply it, because understanding without action changes nothing. And if you do not change, you will return to the very place you are trying to escape. There is a truth you can no longer avoid. You are not taken lightly because you lack value. You are taken lightly because you have allowed others to see you as something always available. Not once, but hundreds of times. Every time you respond immediately. Every time you over-explain. Every time you stay even when you clearly know you are being taken lightly. You are training others how to treat you. And people learn very quickly. They learn that you will always be there. They learn that you will not leave. They learn that they don't need to try. And when there is no need to try, you lose value. This is not their fault. This is the result of how you show up. But if you are the one who created that pattern, you are also the only one who can break it. Not with words, not by talking it out, but with behavior. When you stop reacting immediately, the pace changes. When you stop explaining everything, others start thinking for themselves. When you are no longer always present, your absence begins to carry weight. At first, they will feel uncomfortable. They will say you have changed. They will try to pull you back. They will test your new boundaries. That is not failure. That is a sign you are breaking free. If you go back to your old behavior, you lose everything. If you hold your ground, you regain your power. No need for noise. No need to prove anything. No need to be understood immediately. Just stop being easy to have. You may lose some people, but look at it directly. If they leave just because you no longer chase them, then they were not staying for who you are. They were staying for what you provide. And when you stop providing, they leave. That is not a loss. That is a filter. You do not need many people. You need the right people. And the right ones do not require you to trade your value to keep them. In the end, everything comes down to one point. You do not control whether others respect you or not, but you control whether you continue placing yourself in a position to be taken lightly. You do not control whether they stay or leave, but you control whether you stay in places that diminish your value. And when you control that, you no longer need to demand respect. You become someone who cannot be taken lightly. If you have made it this far, you are no longer the same person. The one who always has to explain. The one who always has to chase. The one who always needs validation. That version ends here. And if you truly understand this, you will begin to change through very small actions. A message you don't reply to immediately. An explanation you hold back. A situation where you choose silence instead of reaction. No one will notice immediately, but you will. You begin to feel different. You begin to control the pace. You begin to stop being pulled by other people's emotions. That is when everything changes. If you are among the few who are aware enough to face this truth, stay. Not for entertainment, but to rebuild how you see the world and yourself. Subscribe to the channel, not because I need a number, but because you need an environment where truths like this are spoken, not softened, not distorted. And if you truly understand this video, leave a comment, because the moment you write it is the moment you no longer return to your old self. And if you know someone who is stuck like you used to be, share this video. Not to save them, but to give them a chance to wake up. As for you, stop talking so much. Let your actions and your silence speak for you.